Okay, I believe we are ready to start. Thank you to all the participants, first of all, for being on time, for being with us in this webinar. My name is Jelka Clements. I'm Senior Advisor at the Center for European Perspective, which is a government organization here in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, established by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2006. Our current project is focusing on reconstruction in Ukraine. It is financed by the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs in the scope of the Slovenian Aid and Partnerships Program and implemented in close cooperation with the EU program You Lead with Europe in Ukraine. This activity was organized with the help of our friends from the Polish Solidarity Fund. After Ukraine took a decisive step on its path towards the European Union in December last year, we thought it was useful and beneficial for our target audience to become more closely familiar with the past, present, and future developments on this path of Ukraine towards the European Union. As Slovenians, I have to say that we are most closely familiar with that of the Western Balkans, our neighboring region, which has been on the path towards the European Union for more than 20 years now. It is here that the EU enlargement policy has been criticized. Now, on all these developments and implications, Mr. Georg Ziegler from DG NIR, Ukraine Service, will be speaking today. This webinar will hopefully be useful to all of you in familiarizing you with the state of play and also the future implications. I'm very pleased to say that most of our participants today, currently we are at 35, possibly some others will join in the next minutes. Most of you are from Ukraine, so a warm welcome to Ukraine this morning. Before I give the floor to Mr. Ziegler, allow me to just focus a bit on the basic housekeeping rules. So this is a webinar. It is taking place in the application Zoom webinar, specifically intended for online lectures. So your microphones are muted. However, we will devote time for questions at the end of the session. The moderator will ask you to please enter any question that you may have into the Q&A section. You can see the Q&A icon below the graphics, below the visual part. You can see the Q&A. You click it and you answer and you enter your question. Mr. Ziegler will be answering many questions in the latter part of the session after 11 o'clock. Please note that timekeeping maybe will not allow all questions to be answered, but we will do our utmost best. For more information about the Center of European Perspective and our project in Ukraine, you are always warmly invited to refer to our website, www.cep.si. I wish you a wonderful webinar and give the floor to Mr. Ziegler.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Clements, for this warm welcome words, and good morning to everybody here in the virtual room. Very happy to meet you and very happy to take you through the enlargement process, of course, with a particular focus on Ukraine, but also this was the request from our Slovene friends to see a little bit what can we learn or which lessons can we draw from the Western Balkan enlargement process. So thank you for putting the slides on. I want just to explain a little bit the photo. It's a photo which I took myself with my smartphone in front of our main building. It's called Berlaymont in Brussels. It was a big kind of demonstration, like a manifestation of Ukrainians that came to Brussels as refugees or that have lived there before, who wanted to express in 2022, before the Commission took the decision to propose candidate status. Ukrainians showed their determinations that really that's what they want. And it was a very amazing demonstration surrounding the whole big building, a whole square. There were several thousand people with Ukrainian flags and posters, etc. I was close to them. I was among them in a way. And I must say that I don't think that any country before has had so many people really around our buildings to say, please think of us, please take our request serious, which we of course did, which you will see now in the slides. Next slide, please. Now, maybe as a scene setter, indeed, there is a question of the impact of Russia's war of accession on the enlargement policy. So Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Of course, this was a terrible shock, and it's an ongoing drama with almost every night attacks by Russia. If there is one, let's say, in all the bad things, one little positive thing, it is that the war has paved the way for Ukraine to the European Union. We received the application on 28th of February, so the 5th day of the war. And this led to a shift of EU policy, because we have been witnessing this for many years when we had the discussions on the association agreement, the deep and comprehensive free trade area. So this famous treaty, which was then signed in 2014, we saw there clearly that the EU welcomes the aspirations, acknowledges the aspirations of Ukraine to go toward the EU, but the EU was not ready at that time to give the enlargement perspective to Ukraine and other countries, Moldova and Georgia. And this has changed through the war, and the application of Ukraine, which was then very soon followed by Moldova and Georgia, has led to revitalization of the EU enlargement policy. The EU enlargement policy was a little bit sidelined. It was a little bit, let's say, I would say there was enlargement fatigue, as we call it here. So there was, let's say, tiredness on both sides, on the side of the EU, who had just gone, let's say, it was 20 years before, but still a big enlargement, 2004, 2007. Croatia joined in 2013. We will see this in a moment. But there was, let's say, maybe not a still stand, but not much was moving forward for the Western Balkans. And through this application by Ukraine, this has given a new sense of urgency, and it's a kind of geopolitical urgency. So all of a sudden, enlargement was no longer seen just as a bureaucratic process of preparing for accession, which is of course very cumbersome, costs a lot of work and a lot of time, but that this is something which is for geopolitical reasons necessary. Of course, one has to be well prepared, but you have to have the sense of urgency, otherwise it will last forever. And we had this understanding when Mrs. Stefanishina, Deputy Prime Minister, came the first time after the war had started to come to Brussels to see how we go forward with the application of Ukraine. Her request was, if we are quick on the Ukrainian side, please, you are quick. And actually we said, yes, that's what we are trying to do. So we handed over the questionnaire. This was our president, von der Leyen, went to Kiev to the president, Zelensky. And then very quickly, Ukraine put together the replies. And we were very quick in producing this opinion. So this was a kind of deal, okay, on understanding. If we are quick on Ukrainian side, please, you be quick as well. And I think so far we have done this. We have Ukraine has stick to this formula, but we and on the EU side as well. So it is now really clear this cannot just be seen as a bureaucratic process. It has to be high on the political agenda. There has to be a political momentum for it. Otherwise, it is going nowhere. And I think from this new dynamism, also the Western Balkan countries in the end will profit. They were worried in the beginning. Why so quick with Ukraine? We have been waiting 20 years, as was said also in the introduction. So, you know, but I think in the end, this new dynamism will help everybody who is in the enlargement chain. So also the Western Balkans. Next slide, please. And you can see this actually also in a text which has just recently in December, a little bit more than 1 month ago, the European Council, which is the leaders of the EU, all 27 either presidents or prime ministers are meeting in the European Council at least every 3 to 6 months. And just in December, they have again clearly said, and now they have said it since many years, they have not said it so clear why enlargement is important. They have said it's a geostrategic investment in peace, security, stability. It's a driver for improving economic, social conditions. And they have clearly said both sides have to be ready. It's not just a task for the candidate countries to be ready for accession, but also the EU needs to be ready to receive states. So the effectiveness of the work in the EU should not be affected negatively by enlargement, but one has to prepare for this. And of course, what is clear, and I think that sometimes maybe misunderstood, there is no fast track. Also for Ukraine, there is no fast track. It's nonetheless, as it always has been, it's a merit-based process. It has to be merit-based because otherwise, if candidate countries join that are not prepared, this will be bad for the single market. It will affect negatively the EU as a whole. That's why we have to insist still in this merit-based nature of the process. However, still it is possible, and that's what we are now looking at. Despite this being really fully merit-based, we have to do it a bit more with a political emphasis, and we just have to be quicker than we were with the Western Balkans. So the European Council has also said there have to be internal reforms in the EU to be ready. I think our president, von der Leyen, she clearly said these reforms, however, should not have the quality of a treaty change, because if you change the treaty of the EU, that's a very risky process as well, because in some member states there may be referenda. We have seen that in the past. We did treaty changes. We wanted to have a constitution. It fell down in several countries. So in the end, we had to do another treaty. So that's why President von der Leyen clearly thinks we need to prepare, we need to do some internal reforms in the EU, but not at the level of the treaty, because that could really endanger the whole enlargement. So the capacity to act of the EU, that's something very important. Next slide, please. Now, just to show you that, of course, enlargement has always taken place. So basically, we were in a way permanently enlarging. Always there were some years in between, but in the beginning, I happened to be a German. So let's say my country was among the 6 founding member states, which was, of course, for Germany a big acknowledgement in the sense, and it was important to reintegrate after the terrible things Germany did in World War II. So it was really important. And then you can see 73, 81, 86, 95, 2004. And what you can see if you look at the table is that enlargement very often has been a response to a historical process. So, for example, in Greece, 1981, there was a military junta. This junta fell, and the EU said, okay, now we welcome you. You have achieved democracy. We want to consolidate you. We want to strengthen you. And Greece was invited to enter the EU. Portugal, Spain, the same. We had Franco, we had Salazar, we had dictatorships, authoritarian regimes. And when they fell, then the countries applied for membership and actually joined then relatively quickly. And the same in 2004 enlargement. I mean, the fall of the Berlin Wall triggered this process. maybe not for Cyprus and Malta, but for all the 8 ones, and later Romania, Bulgaria, they were all behind what we used to call behind the Iron Curtain. And so this historical event triggered this enlargement process. And I think here it's exactly the same now with Ukraine, that there is this war which is triggering that Ukraine can apply, and Ukraine is open the door. Next slide, please. This is just a quick overview of the steps, and you will see fairly soon where Ukraine already is. So this is put like in 9 steps, this whole process. The first step, of course, was done 28th of February 2022. I just mentioned it, 5th day of the war. Then the council asked the commission to submit an opinion on application. This we did. So step 2 we did in June 2022. Then the member states again decide. This is called European Council. They decide to grant the candidate status. Yes, they did it also in June. So very quickly after step 2, step 3 followed, like 10 days in between. So that's done. And now step 4 means once the commissioner met, the decision is taken to open accession negotiations. This decision has been taken in December 2023. So basically Ukraine has done already, or on the way to the EU, 4 steps of these 9 are done. There is some little remaining tasks for really starting the negotiations, but the decision to open, this has been taken in December. So that's a tremendous, also tremendous speed, I must say. We will see later some slides showing how long it took for other countries in the Western Balkans. So that's where we are right now. And then, and this is actually, we work right now, this week, last week, we are working on step 5. This is the proposal for a draft negotiating framework. This we have to send to the council. The council is on the other side of the street. I'm here in Brussels, in Rue de la Loi. On one side, on the other side of the street is the council, and the council is where the member states are, and they have to approve everything. I mean, we are the ones that are proposing as Commission, but we are not deciding. The decision is with the member states, and in legislation is actually, we have 2 co-legislators in the decision. The decision on legislation is by the European Parliament and by the Council. So we always can only propose. It's good that we can propose. We can also later check whether the member states have done their homework, but basically we are not the one deciding. And this is something we will now finish, the negotiation framework. So the draft we will send to the Council, and the Council will have to adopt it. Unfortunately, in a way, for all the accession countries, the decisions in enlargement, we'll come to this, are always taken by unanimity. That makes it, of course, difficult. You need 27 in favor, or at least one can abstain. But if only one country is against, then things are not moving forward. And I think that's important. Yeah, and then so the step 5, let's say, is in the making. We in a few weeks we might have done it, and then we come already to step 6. These are then the negotiations. Of course, the negotiations, they take time. They take years of time. How many years we will see, but it's rather a matter of years, while these others we did very quick, as you can see. And then when the step 7 is, once the negotiations are finished, then we have to give again an opinion, and then the countries need to decide to close the process, to say, yes, everything is done. And then the European Parliament also has a say. They have to give consent before the accession treaty is then drafted and has to be ratified. So that's something also not to be underestimated. The ratification process, which is according to the laws of every member state. Some have even referenda, some have vote in the parliament. And of course, in the candidate country as well, in the accession country, in Ukraine, there is maybe a referendum, maybe there is a vote in the Rada. So this step 9 normally takes between 12 and 18 months. So even once all the negotiations are finished, you need to count in another 12 to 18 months to do the ratification. And that the ratification can go wrong, we have seen with the association agreement with Ukraine, which was voted down in a referendum in the Netherlands some years ago, and we had then to change the text, etc. So this is something not to be underestimated. Step 9. Now, please, the next slide. Now we look a little bit at the overall agenda, because of course we are here also to look a little bit at Western Balkans, so that will help you also to see in a way how much you have already achieved when it comes to Ukraine. So Montenegro, as you can see, already negotiations since now this year it will be 12 years. Serbia started a little bit later, but already negotiations for 10 years. Of course, there are many issues which are related to Kosovo. Albania just finished the screening. The decision of opening negotiations was in 2022. And now, after the screening is finalized, now finally the real negotiations start for Albania with Cluster 1. Cluster 1 is the one on rule of law. North Macedonia is a very similar situation. However, there are some issues they need to do, which are actually linked to Bulgaria. So some constitutional change need to be done, and then they can also open Cluster 1. Bosnia and Herzegovina, the European Council has recommended now opening. However, it's not the same kind of language which was used for Ukraine. So once sufficient compliance with membership criteria is achieved, so this is quite an open language. Actually, it means once the 14 steps and the 14 tasks which have been given to Bosnia and Herzegovina in the opinion on their membership application, once this is sufficiently done, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is very slow because also their constitutional system, the Dayton Constitution, has so many vetoes that it's very difficult to move forward for Bosnia and Herzegovina internally to find consensus, etc. Next slide, please. Yeah, then there is Turkey, or Turkey, as we call it now. They have been in negotiations actually for almost 20 years. However, for many reasons, a standstill came. They were interrupted very often. And since 2018, actually, it's completely, there are no negotiations. And of course, one of the problems is the Cyprus issue. Then a lot of rule of law issues, so that they, the government has done a lot of backsliding on rule of law matters, independence of the courts, and also, of course, the common foreign and security policy. It is not, in many cases, not following the line of the EU. So it's a bit a question mark whether there is still a chance to revitalize the negotiations for Turkey. And then, so Turkey was number 7. There were 6 Western Balkan countries or partners. Kosovo, as you know, is still not recognized by all member states. But there are 6 Western Balkan partners, and Turkey is 7. And then the 3 more. The 3 new kids on the block, as we sometimes say, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. So they came in, as we just said, candidate status very quickly for both Ukraine, Moldova, opening negotiations just recently in Georgia. Now did not get candidate status last year, but got it now in December. So it's just a little bit behind Ukraine and Moldova. Next slide, please. Yeah, now the decisions which have been taken, and I still give you the overall overview so that you know not just what's going on with Ukraine, but also with other countries. So the European Council has decided to open negotiations, Ukraine and Moldova. Of course, some little homework, at least for Ukraine, it's really relatively little, has to be done. We have to report on it. I will come to this. Georgia was the decision to give candidate country. Bosnia, we already mentioned this, also open negotiations, but with a once. So there there it will still take a time until these negotiations are really open. And then for North Macedonia, it has to do some constitutional changes as were decided, or which the EU as a whole then in the end embraced, that they have to do. It's related to the Bulgarian minority, etc. So they are almost as far as Albania. They are actually in parallel with Albania, but they have this issue. And then the European Council, to the highest body in the EU, has clearly say there is the commitment to the membership perspective, and that's, I think, for the first time has clearly said it should be accelerated. So the accession process for the Western Balkans should be accelerated. I think without Ukraine application for membership, this would not have been in this conclusion. So now there is a clear view. All in all, it has to be the whole process of negotiations of enlargement policy has to be quicker than in the past. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what does it mean? Of course, the obligations is quite heavy if you want to become a member state. It's a conditionality you impose on yourself by applying for membership. You say yes. You don't just say, I want to join your club, you know, but it means the club with all the rules and all the laws. And the laws is 150,000 pages of law in the official journal. So it's a huge task, which somewhat a country takes on when saying, yes, I want to become member of the EU. And of course, the fundamentals, we'll also come to this in more detail. The fundamentals, which are mainly related to rule of law, these are things that are not easy to be done. The chapters are now organized in clusters. You will see this. And what is now important is that this goes far beyond the association agreement and the DCFTA. I spelled it wrong here. Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area. This is already covering quite a bit of acquis. We call acquis our EU law. But when you want to become a member state, it's not enough that you just implement the association agreement well, even so if there's already a lot of acquis, but you have to say yes to the whole acquis, and the acquis is a moving target. It means actually every month new laws are added to this acquis, and all of these laws have to be transposed very often. The judges have to be trained, experts have to be there to be ready to implement this law. And what Ukraine is currently working on is the national program for the adoption of the acquis. Slovenia also did that. All the countries that wanted to join, they did that, which shows a bit your planning how to embrace this whole and how to tackle this whole huge amount of EU law. In which quarter of which year you want to do it. It's a planning tool, also, of course, important for the parliament, because the parliament has a lot of work, not just the government with that. And of course, very specific for Ukraine, we have this, of course, the war. We have the reconstruction process. Right now, we are still at early recovery. We are trying to help Ukraine to have macro-financial stability. And this should go hand in hand with the pre-accession process. We'll come to this also later again. Next slide. Now I think I prepared this slide because I know that you are from municipalities. Most of you, you are doing this also in the framework of the EU-LEAD program. So I think, and my colleague who is in charge of the decentralization reform and has a contact with EU-LEAD, he clearly said that never before has there been put such an emphasis on decentralization and multi-level governance, as we call it, as this time. In the opinion on the membership application, there is a long paragraph on this, which has not been the case for other countries. So here really we acknowledge that how important decentralization reform is. we called it in our text, it's a crucial enabler of social economic development. Yeah, it's supported. You see here Slovenia, next to Germany, Poland, Denmark, and the EU as a whole is very much supporting this and part of the EU-LEAD project. You know better than me what is written there. Of course, we have now 1,470 Hromadas. We have fiscal decentralization. Of course, without money, all the rights of the local communities are not much worse. So you need a very stable fiscal decentralization framework as well. Of course, we are fully aware that the Hromadas are basically at the front line in a way. They are strong pillars of Ukrainian resilience. They carry the burden of integrating the internally displaced persons, so the refugees within the country. So really, and that's why they should also play an important role in the reconstruction. I think one should say that this constitutional amendment, this was of course really a pity. There was a plan more or less during February 2022, the process of changing the constitution, doing some constitutional amendments to strengthen local government also at the level of the Ukrainian constitution. Unfortunately, due to the war, this process has not started. And now, of course, a war, there is a commander-in-chief, etc. There is a certain centralization tendencies. This is normally in a war, but I think there is a certain temptation to re-centralize instead of continuing to decentralize. And we, of course, as EU, we always support to finalize the decentralization, to do still further necessary steps, including, of course, the constitutional reform. During martial law, it's not allowed to do this, so we have to wait. But we think it's extremely important to continue this decentralization reform. That's important also for the accession process, but also, of course, for the reconstruction process. Next slide, please. Yeah, now, for the first time, Ukraine got the annual enlargement report, which is a report we do every year for all the countries. Now it's 10 countries. It was in November published, and here we clearly recommended opening negotiations. The council then said yes, we follow this recommendation, and we were spelling out some homework. I called it relatively little homework. The first one, enacting a law which increases the staffing cap. That means there was a limit that you can only recruit up to 700 people for National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and we thought that's maybe not enough. So this was an easy one to just change the cap, or to say it can go beyond 700. So that's also done already. The restrictions on the powers of the National Corruption, on the NAPC, so the Agency for Prevention of Corruption, that these restrictions are removed. I think, if I see correctly, that's also done. We will, of course, officially report on that. And then what is still in the pipeline, it's in the radar now. I think second reading will be, and lobbying, a lobbying law. So that's, let's say, about to be done. And then enact a law which is addressing the Venice Commission opinions and recommendation for national minorities. So such a law has also been done. We are still analyzing it, and we will report it, but the law as such has been done. So please, next slide. This we will not go in details, just to show you that that basically we are constantly monitoring the progress in Ukraine in the various chapters of EU law. We have 33. We will see this in a moment. And we have noted that compared to what we call the analytical report, which was still a part of the opinion on the membership application, that in 5 chapters, technical chapters, Ukraine has improved. So these are the chapters mentioned here. We don't need to go into details, but it just shows it's moving. And of course, it's a long process. So in some of these chapters, Ukraine is at early stage, which is the lowest level. and then slowly going upwards. And for some other chapters, we have a little bit higher starting point, like some level of preparations, but the chapters where there's most work to do, of course, definitely those where Ukraine is still at an early stage. Now for environment, now we went really up by a full grade to some level of preparation. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mentioned this already. Many people, of course, regret this, that we have unanimity, but in a way, there is not many chances to change this. There is also a legal reason for this, because when we do enlargement, when we do accession process, we do a treaty change. One might ask now, why are we changing the treaty? We are changing the treaty, we are adding one word. Which is this one word? The word is Ukraine, because in the beginning of the treaty, you have a list of all the member states, and if a new country joins, we put this name of the new country, and that's a treaty change. Even so, if we add only one word, and treaty change are always done in intergovernmental conferences and are always done by unanimity. So that's maybe the legal reason. So there is, I think, not much chance that we could go to a majority voting and on enlargement. That's, of course, for any country a problem, because it gives, of course, a veto right, and it gives also the possibility to misuse this veto right to put into the enlargement process bilateral issues which normally have nothing to do with the EU process or with preparedness for accession. And that's the temptation which some member states unfortunately cannot resist. And that's why we have delays in some of the processes. And hopefully this will not happen for Ukraine, but it has happened definitely in the Balkans. For North Macedonia, when first Greece wanted North Macedonia to change the name of the country from Macedonia to North Macedonia, and then later Bulgaria had some issues which are not really linked to the preparedness for accession. That's really a pity. So now, of course, you need also unanimity, not just two or three times. You need it at least also for opening, closing of chapters, which is already a lot. So you have many, many vetoes in an enlargement process. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think this is quite basic, and I'm sure you know it, but I wanted still to recall it. The basic check we do, or the basic structure for preparing for accession are the Copenhagen criteria. The first one being about democracy, rule of law, human rights. That's the one we dealt with in the opinion for membership application, because in order to open accession negotiations, you have to sufficiently fulfill the political criteria, the so-called Copenhagen 1, as we call it. So the focus very much has been on this, and of course also will continue to be on this. Then we have the economic criteria, which means a country that wants to join has to be a functioning market economy, but also, and that's the second part, it has to be strong enough, its economy has to be strong enough to have the capacity to cope with competitive pressure from other companies that are on the single market. Because you will be on one market, your country, and if your economy is too weak, you might be eaten up by the others, because there is no protectionism anymore. When you are fully part of the single market, there is one single market, and there of course have to be rules which are governed by the competition policy, state aid policy, but otherwise, it's a free single market, and a country not prepared very easily can be eaten up by stronger companies, etc. So that's also in the interest of the country to be well prepared for the economy. And then the third one is the acquis criteria. It sounds a little bit innocent, ability to take on obligations of membership, but if you really look behind what it means to go and to implement all these 150,000 pages of EU law. This is Copenhagen 3. So in terms of quantity, this creates most of the work. I think in terms of quality, the rule of law is very, so Copenhagen 1 is difficult. But in terms of really work in all ministries, it's Copenhagen 3. And then there is a kind of fourth criteria which came later. The EU, and we saw this already in the European Council conclusions, the EU has to have the capacity to absorb members. It's not in the interest of the EU to be overrun by countries that are joining and then not being able to survive, in the sense not being able to function well. So also the EU needs to prepare. Next slide, please. Yeah, these were the clusters. I already mentioned this before in these various colors, you can see. So here, the cluster 1 is the fundamentals. You see them up to the right side. There's in particular chapter 23, 24. They are the absolutely key chapters: judiciary, fundamental rights, and justice, freedom, and security. Then you have, of course, the internal market in yellow, all the various chapters, starting with the so-called 4 market freedoms: free movement of goods, free movement of labor, free movement of services, and free movement of capital. And then all the others come. These are very, some of those quite comprehensive, not so easy. Particular free movement of goods is a difficult chapter. Then you have, of course, competition and competitiveness and inclusive growth chapter, where you have also the economic monetary policy. The euro is there. It is, of course, expected that there's a readiness in the future, then not necessarily with the day of accession, but later to accept the euro as a currency. Of course, customs union is also part of this. And then you have the more green chapters. You have environment, energy, and transport, which, of course, they are important in the green agenda and the Green Deal. Then you have, of course, chapters where a lot of money goes into the agricultural policy, but also the regional policy. So chapter 22 is regional, chapter 11 is the agricultural chapter. So most of the budget of the EU goes into chapter 11 and 22. So number 1 is chapter 11, number 2 is chapter 22. For the rest, there is actually not so much money. So that's how where the money goes. And then you have this external relations, which is the chapter 30 is more about WTO, and the chapter 31 is really about foreign policy. So here you see these are the clusters, 6 clusters. And you have also here behind the cluster 1 fundamentals, you have the public administration reform, quite important. In general, the functioning of democratic institution and the economic criteria. So they are part of these fundamentals. Next slide, please. Yeah, fundamentals are first and last in a way. So they are really key. And in the revision of the enlargement policy a few years ago, it was clearly said, and that is normally reflected also in the negotiation framework. There you can clearly see that the speed of going forward in the accession negotiations is very much linked to the speed in rule of law. So if there is backsliding in rule of law, then the whole process is slowed down. And if there is a lot of progress, then it can speed up also the accession negotiations. Next slide, please. Yeah, here it's just that you see a little bit Western Balkans. I just chose a few countries. You see here how long it took. Albania applied in 2009, and it took 5 years to get candidate status. How long did it take Ukraine? It applied in February, and it got candidate status 5 months later, not 5 years later like Albania, but 5 months later. So you can see much, much quicker. And opening negotiations was then 2022, so 8 years later. How did it happen with Ukraine? It was 1 year after it applied. Ukraine applied in 2022, and the negotiations, the decision at least, was taken in December 2023. So it's almost 2 years, but it's of course a record speed if you compare with what you see here. For Montenegro, it didn't take so long as for Albania. You see always 2 years in between. Application, candidate status 2 years later, opening negotiation 2 years later. So 6 years from application to opening negotiations. Ukraine, it's 1 year or 1.5 years, almost 2 years from application to opening negotiations. So much quicker. North Macedonia is, of course, in a way, has been, one can say, treated the worst, or I will say why. So they applied in 2004, and the negotiations were open to 2022, which is, of course, you see how many years they had to wait between candidate status in 2005 already and opening negotiations. So 17 years. And that was not due because they were not good in how they prepared themselves for membership, but because Greece did not like the name of the country. They had to change it, and they took many years. Because it's not easy, of course, if such a demand comes that you have to change your name of your country. And then after the issue was solved with Greece, Bulgaria started making problems with bilateral issues. That's something we are very much criticizing. We are not happy with that because if this is, others followed such an example, we will never get to any enlargement. So that's why there should be really a taboo. But we'll come to this. I have it in my slides at the end. So next slide, please. Yeah, we come here already to some lessons learned from the Western Balkans, but later we'll still go a bit deeper into Ukraine. So I think some of the lessons we can clearly see, you need a strong political will to achieve progress. And you need this on both sides. So it's not enough that the candidate countries have this will. The EU also has to have this will that they really want it, both together. And this means also that the fundamentals, so particularly the rule of law, the judiciary, anti-corruption, that these policies are fully embraced and that there is no backsliding. In some of the Western Balkan countries, we have seen backsliding, maybe also because it took so long, difficult to say. There was not enough will, there was not enough really care for the fundamentals. So, and then automatically it takes much longer. So there has to be this will, and there absolutely should not be any backsliding. Then, of course, we need a better balance between the technical and the political dimension of the enlargement policy. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the European Council has clearly also said this now, there is a geopolitical urgency, there is a political dimension, and there is a technical dimension. We need the technical dimension. We need enlargement policy still to be merit-based. So you have to do a lot of technical work, but it has always to be seen in the wider political framework. So you cannot just let the political process run without this political guidance and also with this political urgency. And then, of course, the momentum needs to be maintained. That is very important. So once you lose the momentum, and that has happened with some of the Western Balkan countries, and hopefully it will never happen with Ukraine, but if you lose the momentum, and then it's very difficult to regain it, and then it takes much longer. And of course, I think in general we can say if the pre-accession process doesn't have this momentum, if it lasts too long, then it in a way it kills the motivation and the faith that membership can be achieved. If you are in the waiting room for too long, basically you think you will never make it. So that's also important to keep the process while merit-based, still keep it not too long. And then, of course, how to do that? Okay, I cannot predict this. This is also not, as we call it, above my pay grade. You know, maybe we've had in the Western Balkans too many benchmarks for some of the chapters. There's like 100 benchmark. I think for Serbia in the crucial rule of law chapter, maybe one can do with less, etc., because you need to have benchmarks reports, etc. There, we are analyzing currently how can we make the process a little bit more speedy, while not giving up on the quality, while not giving up on the merit base. So please, next. And then we had, yeah, bilateral issues should be banned from the process. I mean, of course, that's easily said. We as Commission, that's what we clearly think. But it's very difficult to prevent member states, if they want to do it, because there's unanimity to do it. So I don't know, there has to be peer pressure. The other countries have to make it clear that this is a taboo. You don't do that. But in the end, if somebody does it, it's very difficult. So you have to have more a self-commitment not to do it. So that's one of the big issues. And hopefully it will not come up with Ukraine, but one never knows. So these bilateral issues, they should really be solved bilaterally between the countries outside the enlargement process. But let's see. We'll see. In the Western Balkans, things went wrong, particularly with North Macedonia in that regard. Please, next slide. I think here I will not go too much through this. These were the 7 steps which Ukraine had to do in order to get opening for negotiations. So that's basically already done. You can see almost everything was fully completed. For some things, there was some homework left. We saw the homework. I mentioned it, the lobby law or the national minority. So these were the 7 steps which were to 90% done positively, and now the rest is being done as we speak. Next slide. But it's all rule of law. Now, the special challenge, of course, for Ukraine is that there is a war. So we should not forget, we don't have actually 2 processes. We have 3 processes. We have the pre-accession process. We have the reconstruction, rebuilding, recovery, whatever you want to call it, process. And of course, we have the war. We have the ongoing war eating up a lot of resources, of course, and it will all depend on the success of the war, whether process 1 and 2 will actually happen. If Ukraine would lose the war, there would be no accession. And if Ukraine loses the war, there would be a very strange reconstruction, and not by the EU, not by the US. So you can see the war is actually the one which is absolutely decisive for the other processes, and that's really a big challenge. But what we are doing is to help with the Ukraine facility, which is a new financial instrument. 50 billion euros until end of 2027 have just been decided on 1st of February. So just a few days ago, we had a special European Council who decided that. We have a donor coordination platform where the EU coordinates with other countries, particularly out of the G7, but now more countries will join this platform. So G7, of course, with US very strong, but also UK is, of course, inside, Germany, etc. And we and the Ukraine itself doesn't want to rebuild the Ukraine of one day before the war, but the future modern Ukraine, which is already in line with EU policies. That's why it's so important to embed, as we call it, the reconstruction process in the pre-accession process, to combine both processes. That's exactly what our directorate, what our Ukraine service is doing or is trying to do. Next slide, please. I'll come to an end very soon, then have time for your question. This is just to remind, these are these 2 crucial chapters, 23, 24, so that we will always come back to these chapters: judiciary, corruption, respect for fundamental rights, and then, of course, more home affairs. This is about migration. This is about organized crime and terrorism, Schengen. These are all things which are also quite important. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think here we will skip, we will go very quick through that, just to show you that Ukraine is not in all chapters at the same level. There are chapters where we consider Ukraine to be still at an early stage. These are the chapters, I will not read them out, where one could say Ukraine is still quite behind. Then next slide. Then you see the chapters that are already better. Next slide. Oh, sorry, next slide. Next slide, this one. Yeah, now we have then some level of preparedness. That's like 1 grade higher, or / moderately prepared. Yes, free movement of capital. And then all the others, they're already more than early stage. So there is already some level of preparedness. And the one in blue, you see, has just been moved up in our last report. You can see actually in terms of quantity, most of the chapters are actually at some level. And of course, it would be strange if Ukraine would not have some level, because under the association agreement, already many of these chapters had to be worked on, not fully, but to some degree. So these are the chapters where Ukraine is considered some level. Then we go higher. So where Ukraine is already more prepared. Next slide, please. Yeah, we see here the highest. The highest is good level. There are 4 chapters which we consider good level. Was energy, customs union, external relations, which is more WTO, and common and foreign security policy. So here Ukraine got a very high grade, and I think there was not a country that in the beginning already had 4 good level. We have then something which is moderately good level, so in between, which is digital transformation in media. Ukraine is, of course, famous for being very good in digital. Here it's more about the digital acquis, but so Ukraine is very advanced, and moderately prepared is 1 level below good level, but still a very good grade, particularly in a very technical chapter like food safety, veterinary, phytosanitary issues, chapter 12. That's very difficult technically. I think there are 300 regulations to be implemented. So if Ukraine is here moderately prepared, that's very good. And that's important for the export of agricultural goods. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to, we are now coming to an end slowly. So we are now doing the screening for the chapters. We start with the explanatory screening, which is explaining the acquis quite in a detail, then giving a chance for your experts to ask questions to our experts. And then once we have the negotiation framework adopted, we'll come to this in a second, we go into the bilateral screening, where your experts show us how far Ukraine is in each of the chapter, and then we do a gap analysis and write a screening report. Yes, and then we go really in the negotiations with common positions, etc., with chapters open, chapters provisionally closed. There will be benchmarks for some chapters, or for most chapters, opening benchmark, closing benchmark, maybe also some interim benchmarks, particularly for chapter 23, 24. Next slide, please. Yeah, then what we also discuss in the negotiations, of course, will be transition periods. Each country can ask for some limited in scope, limited in time. So it should be really an exception, but for some reasons you can have, you can say, I will not be able by the time of joining the EU with certain things. So please give me some more time. This is called transitional period. That could happen. For example, just to give an example, some asked for the implementation of the water directive. Some countries need to change all the water pipes in the country, which of course not only takes a long time, but costs a lot of money. So of course, for this kind of things, then the EU gives a transition period that you have 5 more years or 10 more years to do this. But also the EU itself wants sometimes transitional periods for the free movement of labor, for example. So for the workers coming in. So there are basically transitional periods demanded or asked for by both sides. Yeah, and then in the end, we have the accession treaty, the ratification, then the membership. Now, please, next slide. Yeah, here you have now an overview, what is now basically coming up. So currently, Ukraine is working on the remaining homework. These are these 4 things, which are quite advanced. Then what we do together with Ukraine is the explanatory part of the screening. The kickoff meeting we had already in January. Mrs. Stefanishina, Deputy Prime Minister, came and we explained the process, and this explanatory is really now starting. Next week we start with chapter 23 and we will continue. And then we will do a report to the Council on the fulfillment of the remaining conditions. That means of this homework, which I mentioned in these 4 areas. And at the same time, we propose a negotiation framework to the Council, as I mentioned earlier. And then the Council adopts the negotiation framework, again by unanimity. Let's see how long it will take. And then we can have the first intergovernmental conference. And when we have the first intergovernmental conference, we can really say, now it's not just a decision on opening taken by the European Council, but now really the negotiations have been really open by this first intergovernmental conference. It's difficult now to say when it will happen, whether it will be in March, whether it will be in June, but we hope that we can do it as fast, as quick as possible. Next slide, if there's still one. No, this we don't need to go through now because I want to leave time for questions. This is about the Ukraine facility. If you later have questions, we can talk about it. Next slide, please. And next slide, which is then the last one, saying thank you, Janku. And we'll now listen to your question. And if you have question on the Ukraine facility, of course, we can go back to the 2 slides which we had here in the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and now looking forward to your questions.
Hello, everyone. Yes, we actually do have questions, and 2 very good ones. Now, the first one from Ljubo Petrova is, Mr. Ziegler, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges facing Ukraine? And what is also the most difficult issue that Ukraine does not solve for joining the EU except war? So that's number 1. And number 2 is actually on Ukraine facility. So it is a great tool to support Ukraine, but the main part of the money is to ensure the work of the government. Will there be cooperation programs between Ukrainian and EU communities, in particular cross-border cooperation programs, which are a good tool? But yes, again, as mentioned in the question, they do require community financing and post-payment, which makes it impossible for many communities to participate. So in our project, this is something that we've been talking through with our municipalities. So co-financing is extremely difficult, but Ukraine is extremely active and eager to cooperate in all possible programs. So these are the 2 questions for now.
Yeah, thank you. The first one, so biggest challenge, I mean, I just mentioned it, the biggest challenge is the war. Because if the war is not won, then we can forget about the whole process. So that's why it's so important now. And that's not, let's say, EU is not really in charge. It's more NATO. EU, of course, helps also militarily, but it's really individually the member states, they do a lot. I think if all member states did as much as some do, we have some front runners helping Ukraine with weapons, and others are quite behind. If everybody would do, let's say, this more actively, which is not EU, it's EU as an institution. This is really the member states themselves have to decide. Ukraine needs more military support, otherwise it will be difficult. Now, of course, very, very crucial is the support from the United States. We have now huge problems in the Congress, as we all know, and we don't even want to think about if Trump would win the elections, what would happen. So, because the military support so far, the United States were the front runners, and I think on the other support, more civilian support, it was more the EU, even so US also did a lot. So now EU has, the more problems are coming from the United States, of course, EU has to be even more active. So I see this as the biggest challenge. Then within the, let's say, pre-accession process, I think it's all the time the rule of law issues, because they will decide on the speed. So the anti-corruption, we need this track record. This is a term which member states like a lot. and rightly so. Means it shows that you don't just arrest some people for show, to show on television, but you want these people to be later to have a court process and to end up in prison, to be basically, if of course their guilt is proven, that they really get punished for corruption. So this is always a long way. You need a higher number of investigations, a higher number of prosecutions, a higher number of convictions, and actually final convictions, because very often then in the appeal, again, something goes wrong and the person, it doesn't end up in prison, the corrupt person. So I think this is definitely a big challenge. I think otherwise Ukraine has a quite good record in implementation of the association agreement. So when it comes to free trade area, etc., so they are on these more economic chapters. I think Ukraine is doing pretty well. So it's more really the fundamentals in sense of rule of law, which are important. To the second question, Ukraine facility, as you know, we just a few days ago, the decision on the money has been taken. The text is not yet adopted. We are now in the final phase. We had the so-called trialogue last week in Strasbourg. Trialogue means it's the European Parliament, just for our guests. It's the Council and the Commission sitting together. So we are now finalizing the text. We hope on 1st of March it will be in the official journal, then we can really start. But it's a very complex facility. I can only tell you in general terms. Indeed, we have most of the money currently will go as a kind of budget support to the government, to the treasury, just to allow Ukraine to continue functioning, to have money for the salaries, to have money for the pensions, to have money, because much of the money goes for military purposes. So for all these challenges, so to survive financially, Ukraine needs this money. This is not yet really reconstruction. It depends. I mean, the country can decide then what to do with this money. But it is triggered, the money flow is triggered by certain reforms that will need to be done. And these reforms will be mentioned in the Ukraine plan. There is a Ukraine plan as a tool, and Ukraine is currently finalizing this plan, and will, once the regulation is adopted, we will get this plan, and the plan has to be endorsed and also by the Council, because this will be the basis for the flow of the money. So we have certain pillars. There's a second pillar. So the first pillar is this money going to the treasury. There was also, as far as I know from my colleagues, I'm not dealing with this directly, that a certain percentage of the money should go to the local communities. So there is a provision, that's what I hear, has been put in during the process. But let's see, the final version is not yet there. We have the second pillar, which is about investment support. So because without also private investment, it will not be possible to rebuild Ukraine. So we do a lot of guarantees, blending, so to bring together the international financing institutions, other investors, and to help them with some guarantees to do the investment. And then we have the so-called third pillar, which is more the traditional TA, technical assistance, how we had it under IPA or under the FAR program when Slovenia joined. This is in the third pillar, but there is not so much money in the third pillar. So that's all I can say.
Thank you. We have two other questions. Now, this is actually from an anonymous attendee, and this is something that we also have been asked before. So how does the process work? Like, can Ukraine actually jump over the heads of other countries that have been joining the EU for longer? Do we have to wait for other countries to be accepted? Now, we always say, of course not. It matters, the process matters a lot, as you explained already. But again, maybe just, yeah. So the attendee says, please explain as if I am 6 years old, which is quite cute, but yeah, so.
No, it's not like a queue that Ukraine is now, it has to go back to the queue, and then only once all the others that are in the queue join, it can join. It's merit-based. That means if Ukraine has more merits than others, even so they are longer in the process. If they don't make such an effort like Ukraine, Ukraine can bypass them. So there's a possibility, like on the auto street, you know, if Ukraine goes 150, normally one should not go so fast, but let's say you can surpass those that go only 80. So in that sense, so eventually you can bypass. But of course, it's not so easy to bypass. Also, it's not so easy to be really so good with all the reforms that are necessary. So in that sense, there is no worry about that. Of course, countries like Serbia, Montenegro, they've been already negotiating for more than 10 years, as we have seen. Now Albania, I've been dealing myself with Albania for some years. I think they're doing really fantastic effort to move forward. They did a vetting of judges. They threw out of their system 50% of the judges and prosecutors for corruption. And there is no country that has done that. They did a vetting. The constitution allowed it temporarily, that they could throw out judges. They did a check on all their assets, etc. So I've not seen a country that it was more thorough on anti-corruption than Albania, I must say. I've not seen that even in Ukraine, even so Ukraine is doing a lot, but if Ukraine did so much as Albania, I'm just saying it. So Albania, I would really wish, as a country I've also helped or tried to accompany for some years. They're a little bit ahead of Ukraine now, and if they continue to be as serious as they were in the past, I think they may enter a little bit earlier before Ukraine. But Ukraine will not have to wait, for example, for Bosnia. Bosnia, as I mentioned already, I've also dealt with Bosnia for some years. The Dayton Constitution, it's not the fault of Bosnia. To some degree, it's not the fault of Bosnia that they are moving so slow. They have a system which is not very effective. And also for being a member of the EU, I think the Dayton Constitution would need to be revised, but it's terribly complicated. So I just to say, Ukraine will not have to wait for all others to join. If the others don't want, if the others do backsliding, then and Ukraine does not do backsliding but goes forward steadily, then it can well go be ahead of some Western Balkans.
Okay, thank you very much for this frankness. And we have more questions, and very, very good ones, actually. So one is from Mr. Juriatskio, from our colleagues in Drohovic. So if Ukraine is in the process of association and negotiation, what EU funds, grants are open now for Ukrainian institutions that we may apply now beside the Ukraine facility? Okay, we also have the Danube Region Program, open some European Social Fund, but are there any more than that come from that you know of that would be really, really useful for the communities?
No, in terms of the instrument for Ukraine, we have now one single instrument. We don't want a dualism of different instruments for Ukraine. The one big instrument, and 50 billion is of course a dimension which no other country has ever seen, but of course no other country had faced a war of aggression with so much destruction. That's why 50 billion is probably still not enough, but at least for the next 4 years we have this 50 billion. Part of them also are loans, so just to be also transparent. But this is one big instrument, and there may be some others by DG Regio, etc., for cross-border cooperation that I don't know now in detail, but there will be not NDC or IPA for Ukraine. This is, we have the Ukraine facility. It's complicated enough, and here I would say, for example, a project like ULEAD would be under Pillar 3, because this is a traditional TA, and then there things could be financed. But most of the money, by far most, is this direct budget support linked to the Ukraine plan and to the implementation of the reforms under Ukraine plan.
Excellent, thank you. So we have one shorter question, and then I'll jump to one longer one. So one is from our colleague from Bucha, Mr. Andrew Melnik. So he asks, who among the current candidates to you could be the best example for Ukraine if we're talking about the efforts, the reforms taken, the legislation, and so on, in your opinion?
Yeah, No, it's a good question. Probably depends a little bit also on the sector. So it may not be one country for everything. But for example, for judicial reform, I think Albania already mentioned it, is definitely a country that did a brilliant job. There may be, for other areas, there may be other countries. I think the problem of Serbia, is there's a little bit of backsliding, particularly in the fundamentals. They may be very good in other chapters. So I know that our Ukrainian partners, I work a lot with the Office of Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, they are in touch. We did recently a very good webinar, a whole day, on the National Program for the Adoption of the Acquis, best practices, and we had Croatia there, we had Albania there, we had Serbia there, I think we had Macedonia there. They were all sharing their experiences. Also, so I think Ukraine sees a lot where to get the best help, and I think almost all candidate countries are actually ready to share their experiences. It's difficult now for me to say exactly, just follow this one or this one. It's good that Ukraine has contacts with these countries, with the people dealing with accession in these countries, and I think they're ready to help. I've seen that, and that's very much appreciated. It's, of course, member states as well, and particularly those that joined in 2004. I mean, it's still an experience that is still somehow present in the minds. It's not, let's say, history like for Germany, etc., or for Greece or Spain. So we see a lot of, let's say, Lithuania, Poland, like Slovenia, being active. I think that's very good. We have the chief negotiator for Poland, Mr. Kruszynski. He was later working in the Commission. He's now retired, but he's still ready to give a lot of advice and so on. So that's also very important, very much appreciated.
Thank you. Now we have a bit more complex and longer question from Mr. Stanislav Taran. So it's a comment and a question in itself, or a couple of questions. So first, he thanks you for the interesting and accessible presentation on such a complex process, and we thank you as well from the side of CEP. Now he asks, regarding the conditions for accession, you emphasized the importance of the economic aspect, which is divided into the capacity to cope with competitive forces in the EU, and also the EU's capacity to absorb members. Now, as you said, Ukraine is moving very fast and it's fulfilling the necessary points in a qualitative way, guided by the motto, if we are fast, you are fast. Now, how do you assess the readiness of the EU economy for Ukraine's accession, since even at this stage, some sectors of the EU economy are starting to block? So we are talking about France and Poland, of course, the process, because they cannot compete with Ukraine. And for example, this is blocking the border because of the better conditions provided by Ukrainian transport companies. Now, the same applies again to agricultural products, which are competitive for European producers. And this applies also to the services, IT, logistics. When do you anticipate the EU economy will be ready to work fairly in these sectors? So this is a question from Mr. Taran.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. Of course, under the DCFTA, already there was a lot of work and a lot of products from Ukraine could go to the market. Now, during the war, in order to help Ukraine, of course, there has been a further liberalization in the sense of no duties on many products where normally there would still be duties. We also did a transport agreement, which normally we would not do so quickly, so that the truck drivers can already go, etc., etc. So these are all things that are meant to help Ukraine during the war. But of course, they also bring problems for some of the, let's say, the truck driving companies in the EU, or for some of the agricultural producers that are not yet used to such a strong competition. And without the war, of course, it would not be like that all these products could so easily enter. So this is something, of course, which there has to be some, maybe here and there some rebalancing, but as long as the war is ongoing, the EU, of course, wants to be as supportive as possible, but we see that for some member states, it's more difficult than for others. So I think here and there some solutions need to be found. Our President von der Leyen, she announced that there will be policy papers, policy reviews for certain policies that are particularly affected by future accession of Ukraine or also Moldova. But Moldova, of course, is not comparable in size, etc., with Ukraine. So work is ongoing. DG Agri, for example, on the agricultural policy. That's of course even for Poland when it joined. We had, and for Slovenia, etc., we had Agenda 2000, which meant a lot of reforms of the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy. There was, of course, then the phasing in. For many years, Poland started with getting only 20% of the subsidies when it joined, and then it slowly moved up. So we may have to work also with transition periods vis-a-vis Ukraine, as we did vis-a-vis Poland and the others. So there is a lot of course, issues that they are not yet to the end thought through. Of course, we are working on them, not just our Directorate General, but also some specific Directorates General like Agri or DG Energy, etc. So I cannot say already now the results of their work, but we will publish these policy papers probably. At least von der Leyen announced that during the Belgian presidency. The Belgian presidency has already started, so that would mean before the middle of the year. But let's see. I've not seen yet so much of this work, but I know it's ongoing.
Thank you. Thank you for this frank answer and a very good one, and also for all the good questions. Now, from our work with the municipalities so far, we also got some first questions about how can the accession process actually affect the local communities. How affected have been local communities in the accession process so far? If we take a look back at the history, what could Romadas expect in this process? So how much will they be affected in the next months, years?
Yeah, of course, the local communities are a very important part of the state that joins the EU. So in that sense, it is important to also follow the laws, the legislation. Of course, most of the legislation will not have to be transposed at the municipal level. So maybe that's in a way the good news. But of course, there may be, for example, in the environmental field, the environmental impacts assessment, etc. Such things are often done at a regional level or even at the local level. So it depends really on the internal structures, also on the division of competencies. I'm living here in Belgium, and here you can see the federal level doesn't have many competencies anymore. The more you go down, particularly to the regions, they have plenty of competencies. Now in Ukraine, Ukraine is different. I mean, there is most of the legislation is done at the national level with the Rada as parliament. And certain things, I don't know here the details, but your lead, of course, would know for which areas of legislation now the local municipalities are responsible. Of course, we know that EU law is basically affecting normally 80% of the laws of a country, because it's just going into so many sectors that this is a reality, and that's why it's important also in terms of keeping the citizens aware. There may be a referendum one day. There also maybe in Ukraine one day there will be not 95% in favor of joining the EU. You know, it depends probably also on how things further develop. So to keep up the spirit, I must say I've been at a very good conference of Ukrainian municipalities with German municipalities in Leipzig recently, where also President Zelensky was part of it, in the sense online, and the German president was there, and many mayors, starting with Mayor Klitschko, but also Sadove from Lviv, many others were there, also from smaller municipalities, and the German municipalities said, yes, it's important also for the accession process, not just for the reconstruction, that the municipalities follow what's going on. Of course, it's also a challenge for us in terms of communication, in terms of outreach. Our current ambassador, we have a very good EU ambassador, my former boss, Katarina Martanova from Slovakia, who still remembers the accession process for Slovakia. I think that she was an advisor at the time for the Minister of Finance to help Slovakia to prepare accession. She has a lot of contacts directly with the municipalities. We have signed agreements actually with some of the municipalities for housing, for IDPs, internally displaced persons. So we gave some money directly to grants to municipalities in the past. And she's now in Kiev at the head of delegation, our EU ambassador. So I think that's also good for you in the municipalities to know that you have someone who has an open ear for this and is very sensitive to this issue of decentralization.
Thank you so much. This is all we have from according to our time, because you've kept almost to the minute, Mr. Ziegler. So thank you for all the information you gave. It was very concise, as some commenters said. It's a very, very difficult process to explain, but you did it amazingly. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for joining us. And also thank you for our participants for your questions. We hope that you learned some things, that the accession process was shown in a new light. And if you have any questions at any point, please do consult us, contact us. I will post our website to the chat. If you have questions, further questions for Mr. Ziegler, you can send them to us and we can forward them to him. And again, thank you for the opportunity of speaking with you, Mr. Ziegler, and thank you for everything. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Clemens, of course, and your institution for organizing this. It's fantastic to see how you are involved also in the ULEAD process. Project, and of course thank you for your attention, your interest. The question really showed that you are really following this with a lot of attention, a lot of excitement. We hope that we and you see we are very dedicated to help Ukraine to move forward on this process. On the whole team here, we are 68, so we are a big team, and many member states have sent seconded experts, so we have also a lot of support from member states directly who want to participate in making this a success. As I said, we hope and pray that you win the war, that you get more weapons, but also for the anti-air defense, because we see every day now the drones that kill people. And we are of course we are with you in this, and we of course we cannot be really in your shoes. But stay safe, and we really it's a matter also not only of our mind but also of our hearts to be with you. So we will support you, we will accompany you, and we wish you the best of luck and safety. Bye bye.
Thank you. You could not have said it better. So thank you, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.
Bye bye.
Bye.